That Trump ordered him to threaten his high school to never release his grades. What could he possibly be hiding? We all assume he failed everything. Did they invent an easy class for him or something? Okay, Donald, welcome back to our special science course, Rock or Not a Rock. There are moments when a political boast is so large that the truth does not need to shout. It only needs a number. And what happened next was the kind of moment television lives for. Not because of screaming, not because of some dramatic confrontation, but because for one tiny second, the performance stopped, and reality quietly walked into the room holding paperwork. Donald Trump had spent years building the image carefully. The billionaire genius, the unstoppable winner, the man who always came out on top. According to Trump, he was never just successful, he was exceptional, smarter than the experts, better instincts than the generals, better business sense than economists, better political understanding than politicians. And somewhere inside that mountain of self-promotion was another familiar claim, that he had graduated at the top of his class. Not near the top, not respectable, the top. And for years that claim floated untouched because that is how these stories survive. Most people never stop to ask for receipts. The myth becomes louder than the evidence. Repeat something enough times with enough confidence and eventually supporters begin defending it for you. That is how branding works. But Stephen Colbert saw the weakness immediately, because confidence has one natural predator: specifics. A vague boast can survive forever. A number cannot. And once Colbert realized that, the trap was already set. Now stay with this, because the next part completely changed the energy in the room. Colbert did not attack Trump immediately. That would have been predictable, easy, forgettable. Instead, he slowed everything down. Calm voice, measured tone, almost respectful. Which somehow made it worse, because the audience could feel something coming. And when an audience feels tension before the punchline arrives, retention locks in. People lean forward, they wait. Their brains start trying to solve the mystery before the reveal happens. Colbert understood that perfectly. So instead of calling Trump a liar, he simply repeated Trump's own claim back to him. If Trump really graduated at the top, then surely there would be records, right? Simple, clean, dangerous. And suddenly the conversation changed. This was no longer politics. This was evidence. Now, 8 years ago, the headmaster at the academy was ordered to find Trump's academic records and help bury them. That way, if a reporter tried to find out if Trump ever learned to read, write, or spell, there would be no smoking gun. The audience laughed. But underneath the laughter was something sharper, because people started connecting the dots. Wait, if the grades meant nothing, why hide them? That question lingered in the air, and Colbert let it sit there. No rush, no interruption, just enough silence for the audience to start answering it themselves. That is what made the moment powerful, not the joke, the pause before the joke. Then Colbert continued. He reminded viewers that this was not some random internet rumor. This was connected to reporting from the Washington Post. Real reporting, real details, real people discussing how far Trump allegedly went to keep those records hidden. And suddenly the story became bigger than grades. Now it was about fear, because people do not usually bury records they are proud of, and the audience knew it. You could actually feel the atmosphere shifting. Then came the detail nobody expected. At his high school, the New York Military Academy. Yes, military. Evidently, when Trump was a teenager, his bones hadn't spurred yet. He was a late spurrer. The room cracked up again, but Colbert still wasn't finished. Not even close. Because the real punchline had not landed yet. And this is where the segment became unforgettable. Colbert lifted the page. Not dramatically, not like some Hollywood reveal. That was the genius of it. The document looked boring, institutional, dry, exactly the kind of paper that destroys exaggerated stories because it has no interest in entertaining anyone. Just names, rankings, cold information, and suddenly the audience got quiet, because everybody knew what was coming. Colbert looked for Trump's name. He checked the top, not there, moved lower, still not there. And with every second the tension got heavier, because now the audience was mentally searching with him. Where is it? Where does the name appear? How far down are we going? He kept scanning, slower, slower, dragging the moment out just enough to make the reveal hurt. And then, he read the number. Not first, not second, not third, not even close to the image Trump had spent years polishing into gold. The audience exploded. Not polite laughter, not applause. Real uncontrolled laughter. The kind that happens when people suddenly see the gap between the performance and the reality all at once. But here is why that moment mattered more than people realize. The audience was not laughing because someone got average grades decades ago. Most people watching were not top students either. Most Americans know exactly what it feels like to be ordinary, to struggle, to work hard without being the best in the room. That was not the issue. The issue was the obsession with pretending otherwise, and Colbert understood that deeper emotional layer perfectly. So instead of turning the segment into cruel mockery, he pivoted, and this completely changed the tone. He reminded viewers that there is absolutely nothing shameful about being average, nothing shameful about not graduating first, nothing shameful about being human. People raise families, work exhausting jobs, pay bills, help neighbors, take care of parents, survive difficult years, and they do all of it without inventing superhero versions of themselves. That line hit hard, especially older viewers, because they have met people like this before. The guy at work who exaggerates every achievement, the businessman who inflates every story, the man at the club who cannot simply tell the truth because the truth never sounds impressive enough. People recognize the personality instantly, and once that recognition clicks, the entire illusion starts collapsing. But what happened next made the segment even more brutal. Because Colbert stopped talking about school entirely. Now he was talking about character. Trump's need to always be the greatest, the smartest, the richest, the strongest, the most historic, the most incredible. Everything had to be maximum volume all the time. And suddenly viewers realized this was not about one school ranking anymore. It was about a lifelong pattern. Good was never enough. Successful was never enough. The story always had to become legendary, even when reality could not support it. And that is where the room changed from amused to fascinated. Because once people start spotting a pattern, they mentally revisit everything else, every boast, every exaggeration, every impossible claim. And they start asking themselves one dangerous question: how much of the image is real? That question hung over the entire segment like smoke. Then Colbert twisted the knife again. If the ranking never mattered, why was there reportedly pressure to hide the records? If critics were irrelevant, why did this moment sting so badly? If the claims were harmless, why did the audience react like they had just watched a balloon explode? That was the brilliance of it. Colbert never needed to scream. The paperwork did the work for him. Because documents are ruthless. They do not care about charisma. They do not care about branding. They do not care how loudly someone talks. Paper simply sits there, refusing to flatter anyone. And for a man whose entire public identity was built on winning, that was devastating. But then something unexpected happened. The segment became strangely relatable. Because underneath the politics, underneath the celebrity, underneath all the late-night comedy, there was a very human insecurity sitting at the center of the story. The fear of being ordinary. And that fear is powerful. People understand it. Maybe not at Trump's scale, but they understand the instinct, the pressure to look successful, the pressure to seem impressive, the pressure to avoid embarrassment. Social media runs on it. Politics runs on it. Corporate culture runs on it. Everyone is curating an image. Everyone wants applause. Everyone wants validation. But the danger comes when the performance becomes more important than reality itself. And that was the deeper point Colbert quietly exposed. Not with anger, not with insults, with contrast. Claim versus record. Performance versus paperwork. Branding versus truth. Now here is the part that really sent the clip viral. Colbert did not over-explain the joke. He trusted the audience. That matters. Because audiences love discovering conclusions themselves. It creates emotional ownership. The viewer feels smart, connected, involved. So instead of hammering Trump with non-stop attacks, Colbert let the silence do part of the work. He let the audience sit inside the discomfort. And every second made the reveal funnier. Then came another twist. People online started reacting less to the grades and more to the hiding. That became the obsession. Because once secrecy enters the story, curiosity explodes. What else was hidden? Why so defensive? Why threaten schools over transcripts? Suddenly the audience was no longer just laughing. They were investigating mentally. And curiosity is one of the strongest retention tools on earth. Once people feel there might be another layer underneath the story, they stay. They keep watching. They keep clicking. That is exactly what happened here. The clip spread everywhere. Not because America deeply cares about old report cards, but because everybody understands the emotional collision they had just witnessed. A carefully built myth running directly into a cold fact. And facts have a strange power, even tiny ones. A single number can puncture years of storytelling. That is terrifying for public figures whose identities depend on perception. Now notice something important. Colbert never claimed Trump was unintelligent. That is what made the segment stronger. He focused on the exaggeration itself. Because exaggeration creates vulnerability. The bigger the boast, the harder the fall. And Trump's brand had always depended on scale. Everything enormous. Everything historic. Everything unmatched. So when the actual ranking appeared, the contrast became comedy automatically. No extra punchline needed, just reality. And then, Colbert delivered one of the sharpest observations of the night. He pointed out that genuinely intelligent people rarely spend all day insisting they are geniuses. That line hit like a brick, because viewers instantly connected it to every public moment they had seen before. Every "believe me," every "everybody says," every "nobody knows more than me." Suddenly the audience was not just remembering the segment, they were replaying years of behavior in their minds. That is what transformed the clip from funny into culturally explosive. It activated memory. And once viewers start mentally connecting dots themselves, engagement skyrockets. But the most brutal part came near the end. Because after all the laughter, after all the jokes, after all the tension, Colbert reduced the entire story down to one painfully simple reality. There is nothing wrong with being ordinary. That sentence quietly destroyed the entire illusion. Because if being ordinary is acceptable, then the desperate need to pretend becomes the embarrassing part. And for 1 second, the room went strangely still. Not silent. Still. Like people were processing something bigger than comedy. Then the laughter returned again, even louder. Because now the audience understood the real target. Not grades. Ego. And ego is always more dangerous than failure. Failure can humble people. Ego keeps them performing long after the audience has stopped believing. By the end of the segment, Colbert had done something incredibly rare in political comedy. He turned paperwork into drama. Think about that. A school ranking, a boring document, a late-night desk, and somehow it felt cinematic. Because the real story was never about academics. It was about identity, about image control, about what happens when someone spends years building a towering public myth, and then one tiny fact suddenly appears underneath it like a crack in concrete. And once people see the crack, they cannot unsee it. That is why the room reacted the way it did. That is why the clip spread. That is why people kept replaying the moment. Not because the number itself mattered, but because of what the number interrupted. For years, Trump's image relied on absolute confidence. But confidence alone cannot survive measurement forever. Eventually, somebody asks for proof. Eventually, somebody checks the records. Eventually, somebody slows the story down long enough for reality to catch up. And in that moment, the performance becomes fragile. That is exactly what viewers witnessed that night. Not a political attack, not a screaming match, a measurement. One claim, one page, one number, and one audience realizing, in real time, that confidence can make a myth famous. But it cannot make it true. And maybe that is why the moment still lingers. Because deep down, people know this story is bigger than one politician. It is about the modern world itself. A world where branding often moves faster than facts, where repetition starts sounding like evidence, where image can overpower reality for years. Until one ordinary document quietly walks into the room and changes everything. And when that happens, the collapse is almost never loud at first. Sometimes it begins with a pause, a glance down a page, a missing name near the top, a comedian holding silence for one extra second, and then, the sound of an entire myth finally meeting reality.